7 days, $70,000, and all you have to do is stand in front of the world and be my husband. I stared at the man across the desk, waiting for a punchline that never came, because there was no smile anywhere on his face. My whole body had gone cold in a way that had nothing to do with the rain hammering the windows. I had walked in expecting a piano tuning job, some rich man's daughter who needed lessons, anything ordinary. Instead, I had walked straight into the single strangest sentence anyone had ever said to me. We were sitting in the cramped back office of a boat repair yard on the north edge of the harbor, and everything in it smelled like sawdust, salt, and old coffee. There was no glass tower, no marble, no assistant by the door. There was a desk scarred with knife marks, a coil of rope in the corner, and a window fogged over with sea air. The man who had made the offer had rough hands, forearms marked with pale old scars, and a flannel shirt rolled up to the elbows. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who built things with his hands, and he also looked like someone living through the worst week of his life. "I don't even know you," I said, and my voice came out thinner than I wanted it to. "You could be anyone. You could be dangerous." He didn't flinch at that. He just reached across the desk with his hand open, steady, waiting. "Ryder Vance," he said, "and I know you, Theo Grant. You teach piano 6 days a week at the community center on Tillman Street. You take night shifts at a distribution warehouse because the lessons don't cover your rent. And your younger brother Caleb needs a spinal surgery that costs $69,000, which the hospital says has to be paid inside 2 weeks or he loses the slot." My stomach dropped through the floor. The rain suddenly sounded enormous, like it was inside my skull. "You investigated me," I said, and it wasn't a question, it was an accusation. "You went through my life like a file." Ryder didn't look away, didn't try to soften it. "Yes," he said simply, "because I have exactly one chance at this and I can't hand it to a stranger and hope for the best. I needed to know that whoever sat in that chair needed this as badly as I do." He stood up then and walked to the window with his back to me, and for a long moment he just watched the rain crawl down the glass. 8 months ago, my sister and her husband were killed by a truck that ran a red light on the coastal highway, he said. They left behind 3 6-year-olds, triplets, Rosie, Milo, and Finn. There was no one else, just me. His voice stayed flat the whole time, which somehow made it worse because I could hear how much effort it took to hold it there. "Their other grandmother is named Marguerite Hollis," he continued, still not turning around. "She has money, she has a law firm on retainer, and 3 months ago she filed for full custody. Her argument is simple and it works. A single man who runs a boatyard, who has no wife, no partner, no support system, who has never raised a child in his life, is not a suitable guardian for 3 grieving children. A judge reads that on paper and it sounds completely reasonable." I finally understood why I was there, and understanding it made me feel sick. "So you told them you weren't single," I said quietly. Ryder turned around and there it was, the first honest crack in him. "I told them I had a partner." I said it out loud in a courtroom because she was standing there smiling at me like she had already won, and I couldn't stand it. Now the court has assigned an evaluator. She comes to the house for 7 days, morning until night. She watches everything. Then she writes a report and the judge decides. "You want me to lie to a court?" I said. "You want me to look a judge's evaluator in the face and lie to her for a week?" Every rational part of me was already standing up and walking toward the door. I had never done anything like this. I paid parking tickets the same day I got them. I was the kind of person who apologized to furniture when I bumped into it. "Do you actually understand what you're asking me to do here?" "I understand exactly what I'm asking you," Ryder said, and he came back to the desk and put both hands flat on it and leaned in, and his voice finally broke open. "I'm asking you to help me keep 3 children who cry in their sleep. Marguerite doesn't want them, Theo. She wants to win. She hasn't visited once in 8 months, not one birthday, not one school event, not one single Sunday. But the second the paperwork gave her a way to take something from me, she came running with a folder." I thought about Caleb. I thought about my little brother lying in a hospital bed making jokes about the ceiling tiles because he knew I couldn't afford to fix him. I thought about the 3 missed calls sitting on my phone from a billing department that had stopped being polite 2 weeks ago. I thought about the shape my life had folded itself into, and how there was no honest road out of it that arrived in time. That is the thing nobody tells you about desperation. It doesn't feel like a dramatic choice. It feels like standing in a long hallway where somebody has locked every door except one. And if we get caught? I asked. My voice barely made it across the desk. Ryder was quiet for a second, and then he told me the truth instead of something comforting, and that is the exact moment I started to trust him. Then I lose all three of them. I lose the yard paying for the appeal, and I probably deserve it. He slid the contract toward me. But if I don't try, I lose them anyway. At least this way I go down having done something. I picked up the pen, and my hand shook so hard that the tip rattled against the paper. I have conditions, I said, surprising myself. I don't touch the money until the 7th day is finished, and if at any point I think I'm hurting those kids, I walk out and you don't get to stop me. Ryder nodded once, immediately, without hesitating, and something inside my chest loosened. Then I signed my name at the bottom of the page, Theodore Grant, in handwriting that didn't look anything like mine. We drove out of the harbor 20 minutes later in his old truck, wipers dragging across the windshield, the city thinning out behind us into pine trees and gray water. He didn't play music. He didn't attempt small talk. He just gripped the wheel and drove. And somewhere around the 3rd mile he said, without looking over at me, "Thank you." I stared straight ahead at the road and told myself that this was a job, a transaction, 7 clean days, and then my brother gets to walk again and I go back to my small, ordinary life. That was the story I chose to believe as the trees closed in around us. I had no idea that I hadn't just signed a lie. I had signed my way directly into a family. The house appeared out of the rain about 40 minutes outside the city, sitting low against a lake the color of hammered steel, with a wooden dock reaching out into the water like an arm. It wasn't a mansion. It was a real house, weathered cedar and a sagging porch and a rope swing hanging from a fir tree, the kind of place loved for a long time by people who never had much money. Ryder killed the engine but didn't move, and for a second we both sat there listening to the rain drum on the roof of the truck. 2 rules, he said, and his voice had changed completely from the office. It was lower now, protective, almost afraid. First rule, you never lie to the children, not once. They know you're a friend of mine who's staying for a while and helping out. That's all they need, and that's all we give them. I'm not putting a fake father in front of them and then taking him away in a week. They've already had enough taken. Something enormous unclenched in my chest, some knot I hadn't known I'd been carrying since I signed that paper. Whatever else this man was, he wasn't willing to break those children to save himself. And the second rule, I asked. Ryder's hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles went pale. Don't ask Finn questions, he said. Just let him be. I opened my mouth to ask why, and that was exactly when the front door banged open. The first one out was a small girl in rain boots and a paint-stained sweater, marching down the porch steps with a spiral notebook clutched against her chest like a clipboard. She stopped in front of the truck, looked at her wrist where there was no watch at all, and announced, "You're late." 11 minutes. Ryder got out and crouched down and said, "I know, I'm sorry, Rosie," with the absolute seriousness of a man reporting to his supervisor, and she nodded and wrote something down, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing on my first minute there. The second one came out at a dead sprint, one shoe missing entirely, hair sticking up in 6 directions. "Uncle Ryder! Uncle Ryder! I got on the roof again and you can see the whole lake and I didn't even fall." Ryder pinched the bridge of his nose. "Milo, what did we agree about the roof?" Milo considered this carefully, then shrugged with the confidence of a boy who had already won the argument in his own head. "That I only go up if it's important." And it was important. It was very important. And then the third one came out, and everything went quiet inside me. He stopped in the doorway and stayed there, half hidden behind the frame, one hand resting flat on the wood. Same dark hair as the other 2, same round face, same 6 years of life, but his eyes were completely different. He looked at me the way adults look at each other across a room when they already know the bad news, and I felt something turn over in my chest. He did not wave, he didn't smile. He just looked and kept looking until I felt like every honest and dishonest thing about me had been read and filed away somewhere I couldn't reach. "That's Finn," Ryder said, coming up beside me. His hand went to the boy's hair with a tenderness that didn't match anything else about him. "He hasn't spoken since the accident, 8 months. The doctors call it selective mutism. They say it's trauma, and that pushing him makes it worse." He said it evenly, but I could hear the whole ocean underneath it. "So we don't push him. We wait." Dinner was chaos in the best possible way. Rosie assigned everyone a seat and enforced it with the authority of a dictator. Milo told a story about a raccoon that grew less believable and more elaborate with every sentence. Ryder cooked badly and cheerfully, burning the edges of everything, and nobody complained because clearly nobody ever had. And Finn sat at the end of the table and ate and watched, present in the room in a way that felt exactly like standing next to a closed door. Afterward, while the others were arguing about whose turn it was to feed the cat, I wandered into the living room and found it. An old upright piano against the far wall, closed, with a layer of dust on the lid and a framed photograph lying face down on top of it. I didn't think. I just did what I have always done. I lifted the lid, sat down, and pressed one key to hear how bad it was, and it was very bad, at least 3 notes sour, but the room changed anyway. Rosie appeared in the doorway and dropped her notebook. Milo came in, left, and came back twice. And then I felt it, the smallest weight on the air, and I didn't turn around, because I already knew. I played the piece my mother used to play when I was small and couldn't sleep, the one I never play in front of anyone because it always closes my throat. It's a simple thing, barely more than a lullaby, and I let it fill that dusty room. When the last note faded, Finn crossed the floor without making a sound, climbed onto the bench beside me, and placed one small finger on a white key. He didn't press it, he just left it resting there, like he was testing whether the whole thing was safe. I looked up. Ryder was standing in the doorway with a dish towel forgotten in his hands, and his eyes were red. "He hasn't come into this room since the funeral," he said, so quietly it was almost nothing. Later, when the house had finally gone still and all 3 of them were asleep upstairs, we ended up out on the dock. The rain had stopped and left everything dripping, and the lake had turned to black glass with the moon broken across it. Ryder handed me a mug of coffee, and we stood there not saying anything for a while, and it was strangely comfortable, like the silence had agreed to hold both of us. "You hired me to sell a lie," I finally said, watching the water. "But those kids in there aren't a lie. That's a real family, Ryder. You've been holding it together with both hands for 8 months, and nobody has given you credit for a single day of it." He didn't answer. He just stared out at the lake, and his jaw worked once, and I understood that nobody had said anything like that to him in a very long time. "Why the boatyard?" I asked, because I wanted to keep him talking. "Was it always yours?" He almost smiled. "Our dad's. My sister did the books, I did the hulls. She used to stand right where you're standing and tell me I worked too much." His voice caught on the last word and stopped, and I did the only thing I could think of, which was to say nothing at all and simply move closer to him. That was the moment headlights swung across the front of the house. They came slow up the gravel drive, too smooth, too expensive, a black car that did not belong within 50 miles of that lake. It stopped, the engine cut, and beside me Ryder went absolutely rigid, the mug frozen halfway to his mouth. "What is she doing here?" he breathed. "It's almost 11 o'clock. Marguerite Hollis did not enter a room so much as annex it. She came up the porch steps in a cream coat that had never once been rained on, with a lawyer trailing 2 steps behind her carrying a leather folder, and she smiled at us through the screen door as though arriving at a stranger's house at 11 at night was perfectly natural. Her perfume reached us before she did and rearranged the entire house, pushing out the smell of burnt dinner and lake water. She was somewhere in her 60s, beautifully assembled, and her eyes moved over me once, top to bottom, pricing me. "Ryder," she said warmly, "and this must be the partner." His hand found mine before I even registered him moving, and his grip was tight enough to hurt. "This is Theo," he said. "Theo, this is Marguerite." I made myself smile and shake her hand, and her fingers were cool and dry, and she held on half a second longer than was comfortable, still smiling, still reading me. "How lovely," she said, stepping inside without being invited. 8 months and you never mentioned him once. Not at the hearing in March, not on the telephone in June. She ran one finger along the arm of the sofa, glanced at it, checking for dust, then wiped her hand on a tissue from her pocket. "I've simply come to see the children. Rosie is my son's daughter, after all." "Rosie is my sister's daughter," Ryder said, and there was iron in it. "All 3 of them are, and they're asleep upstairs, which you knew before you drove out here." Marguerite's smile did not move a single millimeter, but something behind it sharpened, and she turned to me instead, which was worse. "So Theo, what is it you do?" I told her I taught piano. She repeated the words back slowly. A piano teacher, the way you'd hold up something unpleasant you found on the bottom of your shoe. Then she asked the question I should have seen coming and hadn't. And how long have the two of you been together? That was the exact second I realized we had never built a story. Not one detail. No date, no place, no first meeting. Ryder had prepared for a court evaluator and forgotten entirely to prepare for an ambush, and my mind went blank in the most catastrophic way. The lawyer's pen was already moving. 2 seconds of silence would end all of it. 2 years, I heard myself say. We met in a hospital waiting room. Marguerite's eyebrow lifted a fraction. The night his sister was brought in, I continued, and my voice steadied as I went, because I had stopped inventing and started remembering. I was there for my younger brother. He'd had spinal surgery that morning. I sat in that room for 11 hours, and Ryder was the only other person in it who wasn't crying loudly, and around 4 in the morning he got up and brought me a coffee I hadn't asked for and didn't say a word. That's how we met. The room went very quiet, because every part of that was true except the 2 years. Marguerite recovered fast, but not quite fast enough to hide it, and I could feel Ryder's hand shaking inside mine. How touching, she said, and gathered her coat. At the door she paused and delivered it over her shoulder, light as a feather. Do enjoy the evaluation week, both of you. I'll be following the results with enormous interest. Then she was gone, and her tail lights swung back down the gravel, and neither of us moved for a long time. Where did that come from? Ryder finally asked, staring at me. Because it wasn't true, I said, except it was. I really was there that night. 3rd floor, west waiting room. Caleb's second surgery. Ryder looked at me then like the entire shape of me had changed, like he was seeing something he had walked past all week. The next 4 days were the strangest and best days I had lived in a very long time. Dana Price, the court evaluator, arrived every morning at 8 with a laptop and a completely unreadable face. She never interfered and she never helped. She simply sat in the corner and watched us live. And so we lived. She wrote constantly and told us nothing at all. I got up at 6 and made breakfast badly until Rosie took over supervising me. I drove them to school with Milo delivering commentary from the back seat like a sports announcer. Ryder started coming home from the yard by 4 instead of 7, and I noticed the exact day he started doing it, and I noticed that he noticed me noticing. In the evenings I played and Finn sat beside me on the bench. On the second night he pressed a key. On the third night he pressed 3 of them in a row, deliberately, and looked up at me to see whether I had caught it, and I said, "That's a good one," without making a fuss, and kept playing. He leaned very slightly against my arm and stayed there for the rest of the song, and I had to concentrate hard on the keys so I wouldn't ruin it. On the 4th night, Rosie climbed onto the couch beside me and opened her notebook to show me what she had been documenting all week. Every page had a drawing of a family on it. Same house, same dock, same fir tree. On the early pages there were 4 figures standing in a row. On the newest pages there were 5. "Who's this one?" I asked, pointing at the tall figure at the end. Rosie gave me the withering look of a 6-year-old dealing with an idiot. "That's you," she said, and went back to coloring, and my chest caught fire and I had to stare at the ceiling for a second. That night I went upstairs and stopped outside Ryder's door, because it was open a few inches and the light was still on. He was sitting on the floor with his back against the bed, holding the photograph that had been lying face down on the piano. His sister laughing, standing on the dock in summer. 3 days left, I said from the doorway. "I know," he said, without looking up. I stood there gripping the frame of the door. "Then why does it feel like I'm about to move out of my own house?" He looked up at me, and whatever was in his face right then was not in the contract, was not on any page of it, and both of us knew that, and neither of us said it, because saying it would make it real, and we had 3 days left. I said goodnight. He said goodnight. I went to my room and lay awake listening to the lake move against the dock, trying to remember what my life looked like 9 days earlier and failing. At 5 in the morning I was pulled out of sleep by a sound I will hear for the rest of my life. It was Milo, and he was screaming from outside the house. I hit the stairs at a run with Ryder half a step behind me, both of us barefoot, the front door banging open into gray pre-dawn light. Milo was standing at the end of the wooden dock in his pajamas, pointing at the water with both arms, shrieking a name over and over until it stopped sounding like a word at all. Finn's small red jacket was floating 12 feet out, and Finn was not in it. I don't remember deciding to jump. I remember the boards under my bare feet, and then I remember the cold, and the cold was so total and so violent that it emptied every thought out of my head at once. It felt like being hit rather than being submerged. My lungs locked. My arms didn't want to work. Somewhere far above the surface I could still hear Milo screaming, and that sound was the only thing that kept me pushing forward instead of turning back. I went down twice and found nothing but weeds and black water. On the third time my hand closed around fabric, then an arm, then the small, solid weight of a 6-year-old, and I dragged him up into the air and half swam, half hauled the two of us back to the dock. Ryder was already lying flat on the boards with both arms stretched out, and he took Finn from me and rolled him onto his side, and for 4 seconds nothing happened. Then Finn coughed, and water came out of him, and he breathed. I have never heard a better sound in my life. Rosie was on the dock now in her socks, sobbing into both hands. Milo had gone completely silent, which was somehow worse than the screaming. Ryder wrapped Finn in his own shirt and held him against his chest and rocked him back and forth, and the look on his face was something I hope I never see on another human being. A kind of terror so complete it had gone past expression into blankness. We drove to the county hospital with the heater roaring and all 3 children in the back and my clothes soaking through the seat. Finn was awake. Finn was breathing, and nobody said anything for the entire 40 minutes except Rosie, once, quietly, asking if it was her fault for not waking up. Ryder told her no in a voice that barely worked, and I watched the road and could not make myself say anything at all, because I was shaking too hard to shape words. The emergency department moved fast. They took Finn straight through, and a nurse came out to us in the corridor with a clipboard and a form and a pen. She looked between the two of us and then held it out to me, because I was the one still dripping, the one who had pulled him out, the one who looked like the father. "We need consent for a chest x-ray," she said. "You're his legal guardian?" I took the pen, and then I stopped. I stood there in a hospital corridor with lake water running out of my hair and understood, completely and finally, what I actually was. I was nothing. Legally, I was a stranger to the child I had just carried out of that water. My name was not on one single piece of paper anywhere in the world that connected me to him. I could love him and it would count for exactly nothing at a nurse's station. I could go into a freezing lake for him and still not be permitted to authorize a photograph of his lungs. "I'm not," I said. My voice barely functioned. "I'm not his guardian." The nurse took the form back without a flicker, because to her it was procedure. It was nothing, it was 30 seconds of her shift. And that small, ordinary motion, the clipboard turning away from me, hurt worse than the cold water had. Ryder stepped forward and signed it with hands that were still shaking, and I watched his pen move across the line and felt something inside me break in a place I never knew was holding weight. They kept Finn for 2 hours. Mild hypothermia, no aspiration, no lasting damage. He had gone out at first light because a heron had landed on the end of the dock and he had wanted to see it, and the boards were wet from the rain, and he was 6. That was all. That was the entire terrible reason. We sat on plastic chairs in the corridor afterward, the children asleep across 3 seats, and I finally said it out loud. I had to put the pen down. I couldn't sign it. Ryder turned his head toward me. "You pulled him out of the water," he said, "and I was still nobody," I answered. It took 30 seconds in that hallway to prove exactly how little I exist in their lives. He reached over and took my hand. Not for an evaluator, not for a lawyer. There was nobody in that corridor to perform for at 6 in the morning, and he took it anyway and held it on the arm of the chair between us. "You're not nobody," he said. "Don't ever say that to me again." And that is when a voice came down the corridor from the direction of the elevators, warm and unhurried and absolutely delighted. What a beautiful picture. Marguerite was walking toward us in a different coat, her lawyer beside her, a folder tucked under her arm. She stopped in front of our chairs and looked down at our joined hands with an expression of enormous satisfaction. "I came the moment I heard about poor Finn," she said. "The hospital telephoned me. I'm still listed as an emergency contact, you see. Small detail, they do add up." "Not now," Ryder said, standing. "Not here, not with them asleep 10 feet away." "Oh, I think now is perfect," she said, and opened the folder and drew out a single sheet and held it up between 2 manicured fingers. My entire body went to ice for the second time that morning. It was the contract. Photocopied, clean, every line readable, my signature sitting at the bottom. 7 days, $70,000, terms of engagement, all of it, in black and white, in a hospital corridor at dawn. Your attorney's paralegal, Marguerite said pleasantly, is a lovely young man with a great deal of student debt. Really, Ryder, if you're going to commit fraud, don't file it. She let the paper drop back into the folder. The final evaluation meeting is at 10 tomorrow morning. I'll be presenting this to the judge, along with a motion for emergency custody based on the near drowning of a child in your care. Ryder didn't move. He didn't argue. He just stood there, and I watched every last piece of hope go out of him like a light going off inside a house. Then she turned to me, and for the first time her smile was completely genuine, and that was the most frightening thing about her. Mr. Grant, a word of advice, one adult to another. Take your money and be gone before 10 tomorrow. You're a hired actor, not a conspirator, and there is still a version of tomorrow in which you are not named in a fraud investigation. Your brother's surgery is scheduled, isn't it? I would hate for that to become complicated. She walked away. Her heels made a small clean sound all the way down the corridor and into the elevator, and then it was quiet again, and the 3 children slept on the chairs behind us, and my hair was still wet, and I stood in that hallway understanding exactly one thing with total clarity. I had not saved Ryder Vance. I had handed his enemy the weapon. He wouldn't look at me. He picked Milo up off the chairs and said, "Get Rosie's shoes," and his voice was so hollow it did not sound like him at all, and we carried 3 sleeping children out to a truck in the gray morning and drove home without speaking once. It was the longest night of my life, and it started at 9 o'clock in the morning. Ryder didn't speak to me for the entire day. He sat at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he never once drank, staring at the grain of the wood, while upstairs I folded 4 shirts and a pair of jeans into a bag that had never really been unpacked. The children moved around the house on tiptoe, the way children do when they can feel a storm inside the walls even though nobody has told them anything. Rosie didn't open her notebook once. Milo didn't go near the roof. Finn sat alone on the piano bench with the lid closed and his hands flat on top of it. At 4 in the morning my door opened and Ryder was standing in it. "Go," he said. I dropped the shirt I was holding. "What?" She was right. That's the part I can't get past. He stayed in the doorway, gripping the frame like he needed it to stay upright. "If you walk into that room tomorrow, they will name you. Fraud on the court, conspiracy, whatever their firm decides sounds worse than a filing. Your brother has surgery in 11 days, Theo. He needs you outside of a courtroom, not sitting inside one." His voice was flat and final. "I'm transferring the full 70,000 this morning. You did the job. There is no reason on earth for you to burn for a lie that was mine." "The job," I repeated. I crossed the room and stood directly in front of him. "Ryder, yesterday morning I went into that lake. Don't stand in my doorway and call it a job." Something in his face finally cracked all the way through. "And I'm not going to let you lose everything because I asked you for help," he shouted, and then instantly went silent, both of us frozen, listening for footsteps on the landing that thankfully never came. We stood there in the dark hallway, 2 people with everything left to say and about 5 hours left to say it in, and neither of us managed a single word. "I'm going," I said at last. His shoulders dropped and he nodded and started to turn away. "But I'm not going to the hospital," I said. "I'm going to the courthouse." He stopped dead where he stood, one hand still on the doorframe, and did not turn back around for a long moment, and when he finally did, his eyes were wet. "You don't have to do that." "I know," I said. "That's exactly why I'm doing it." At 10 o'clock that morning, I walked into a room with a long table down the middle of it, and there were more people in it than I had expected. The judge, Marguerite and her lawyer with the folder already open in front of them, Dana Price with her laptop closed, Ryder, in the only suit he owned, which did not fit him anymore because grief had taken 15 pounds off him, and me, in a borrowed jacket, with my hands shaking so badly that I had to press them flat against my thighs to keep anyone from noticing. Marguerite's lawyer had barely opened his mouth when I asked to speak, and something in my face must have been strange enough that the judge allowed it. "Your Honor, before anyone shows you anything, I want to be the one who tells you," I said. 7 days ago I signed a contract. $70,000 to present myself as Ryder Vance's partner for the duration of this evaluation. My brother needs a spinal surgery I cannot pay for, and I was out of options, and I said yes. It is true, all of it, and Mrs. Hollis has a copy sitting in that folder, and I would rather you heard it from me than from her. Marguerite's smile widened. She actually sat back in her chair, satisfied, like a woman watching a building she had condemned finally come down in front of her. "But there are things that were not in that contract," I said, "and I would like to say them out loud before I leave this room, because nobody else in here is going to say them for me." I turned so that I was speaking to the judge and not to her. "It was not in the contract that Rosie keeps a notebook where she draws her family every single day, and that she counts everybody in the house every morning to make certain the number hasn't changed, because 8 months ago the number changed while she was asleep. It was not in the contract that Milo climbs onto the roof, and I want to be clear about why he does that, because he told me himself. From the roof you can see the road, the one his parents were supposed to come home on. He goes up there to watch it. He is 6 years old and he still checks." The room had gone completely silent. Dana Price had opened her laptop and was typing very fast. "And it was not in the contract," I said, and my voice finally started to go, "that a child who has not spoken in 8 months would come and sit down beside me at a piano. I didn't earn that. I didn't do anything clever to make it happen. I just kept playing, and I never asked him for anything, and he came anyway. That happened in that house, Your Honor, in that man's house. Because that man built somewhere safe enough for it to happen, on his own, with no help from anybody, while being told inside this building that he wasn't good enough." I made myself look at Marguerite then. "You want to ask what I am? I'll tell you exactly. Yesterday morning I stood in a hospital corridor and a nurse handed me a consent form, and I had to put the pen back down, because legally I am nothing to that child. You're right about me. I have no standing. I have no rights, but I am the one who went into the water. And if you asked me to do it again tomorrow, I would go in again, and I would go in for all 3 of them, and nothing inside that folder on your table changes that." I looked at Ryder last. He was crying silently, not bothering to hide it, and I don't think he had even noticed he was doing it. "I'm saying this today instead of running," I said, quieter now, "because I fell in love with those children, and I fell in love with him, and I am not willing to let any of that be true inside a lie. So I'm telling you the truth, and I'll take whatever comes with it." Marguerite's lawyer was already on his feet. "Your Honor, this is a confession of fraud upon the court, and I would ask that it be entered into the record as—" And then a small voice came from the doorway at the back of the room. "Theo." Everything stopped. Everyone turned. The bailiff turned. The judge turned. Even Marguerite turned, and her open folder slid off the table. Finn was standing in the doorway in his coat, holding the hand of the neighbor who had driven the children over and been told to wait outside. He wasn't crying. He was just standing there, looking straight down the length of that long room at me, and he had spoken for the first time in 8 months and 1 week, and the word he had chosen to spend it on was my name. "Theo, don't go." 4 words, that was all of it. But in that room, on that morning, they landed with more weight than every page inside Marguerite's folder combined. Dana Price stood halfway out of her chair. The judge took off his glasses and set them down on the bench very slowly and said nothing for a long moment. Marguerite's lawyer stayed frozen mid-sentence with one hand still raised. And Marguerite herself looked down at the table in front of her. And for the first time since I had met her, that woman did not have a single thing to say. Ryder went down onto his knees right there on the courtroom floor, and Finn ran the whole length of the room into him. And the 2 of them held onto each other and sobbed in front of a judge, a bailiff, and 2 attorneys, and nobody stopped them. Rosie and Milo came through the doorway after him, because of course they did, and then it was 4 people on the floor, and I was standing 3 feet away with both hands over my mouth. The judge did not hand down a decision that morning. Real life doesn't work that way. He adjourned the hearing, ordered a supplementary report, and asked in a very dry voice that nobody else attempt to introduce evidence obtained from a law firm's own paralegal. Because that was the part Marguerite had never thought through. My contract was real, and my confession was on the record, and it hurt, and it cost me. But paying a paralegal to remove a privileged document out of an attorney's file is not clever, it is a crime. And once the judge pulled that thread, the whole thing came apart in her hands. Her firm withdrew inside a week. She filed nothing further. Dana Price's supplementary report ran 14 pages. Ryder read 1 line of it out loud to me months later, standing in the kitchen with the paper shaking slightly in his hand. In this household, a child who had been silent for 8 months chose to speak. I am unable to recommend against this home. 3 weeks after that, Ryder Vance was granted permanent guardianship of all 3 children. But I wasn't there on the day the order came through, and that is the part of this story I can't tell as neatly as the rest. Because I walked out of that courthouse and I did not go back to the lake. I went to the hospital and I sat with my brother and I did the thing I had already decided on somewhere between the water and the witness stand. I returned every cent of it, all $70,000, back into Ryder's account before the end of that same day, with a message attached that said only, "I can't take money for that." Then I sold my piano. It was my mother's. It was the only object I owned that mattered, and it covered 11,000 of what I needed. I signed a payment plan with the hospital for the rest that will take me the better part of 9 years to finish. Caleb had his surgery on a Tuesday in October and walked 8 steps on the Friday, and I stood in the corridor outside his room and cried so hard that a stranger found me a chair. It was hard. It is still hard. But it was clean, and after 7 days of living inside a lie, I wanted one thing in my life that nobody could put inside a folder. I didn't call. I didn't write. I told myself that a man rebuilding a family did not need the person who had nearly cost him one, and I let 11 days go by, and I got very good at not looking at my phone. Caleb told me every single day that I was being an idiot. I told him he was recovering and should focus on that instead of me. On the 11th day, I came back down the hospital corridor, carrying 2 coffees, and stopped so suddenly that I spilled both of them down my sleeve. Ryder was standing at the end of the hall, and behind him, lined up in their coats, were 3 children. "What are you doing here?" I said, and my voice came apart on the second word. "Rosie wore me down," he said. "She has a written argument, 6 pages. There are subheadings." Rosie nodded gravely to confirm this. And Milo went through my phone until he found the hospital name. Milo looked entirely unrepentant. "And Finn?" Ryder stopped and had to start the sentence over again. "Finn said that if we didn't come and get you, he'd take a bus." I looked down at Finn. He shrugged, in exactly the way Milo does, and it undid me completely. Ryder crossed the corridor and stood in front of me. "I hired you for 7 days, he said. "I know. Those 7 days are over." My chest went tight. "I know that too. So I'm asking you for something else now." He reached into his jacket pocket. It wasn't a ring and it wasn't a contract. It was a key on a loop of string, with a small crooked shape cut out of scrap cedar hanging beside it, and burned onto the wood in wobbly letters was a single T. "Rosie made the tag," he said. "She's been carrying it around for 4 days waiting for me to stop being a coward." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely take it out of his palm. "No money," Ryder said. "No end date, no performance. Just come home, and then don't leave." I didn't answer him. I stepped forward and kissed him instead, right there in a hospital corridor in front of 3 6-year-olds, who immediately produced the loudest and most theatrical sounds of disgust I have ever heard from human children. And in the middle of all that noise, Finn laughed. It was the first time. A real one, startled out of him, high and bright and completely ordinary, the most ordinary sound in the world, and every single one of us stopped and turned to look at him, and he went pink all the way to his ears and hid his face in Ryder's coat. Rosie updated her notebook that same night. 5 figures standing on the dock. She made me sit still for the drawing and complained the whole time. "There is no piano in that house anymore, because I sold mine and Ryder's old upright finally lost the will to live somewhere around Christmas. So we do it badly on a second-hand keyboard in the corner of the living room with 2 dead keys, and Finn plays the left hand now, and he talks constantly, mostly about herons." 7 days ago, in a dusty office that smelled of sawdust and salt water, I signed my name to a lie because I was broke and out of choices and frightened. That piece of paper is gone now. Ryder burned it in the fire pit at the end of the dock, and the 2 of us stood there and watched it go, and neither of us said anything sentimental, because we didn't need to. But that lie gave me the only things I have ever actually wanted. A house on a lake that is far too cold to swim in, 3 small hands that reach for mine without checking first, and a man who chose me during the worst week of his life, back when I still hadn't learned how to choose myself. Sometimes the biggest lie you ever tell turns out to be the one road that finally takes you to the truth.